Let's move on to our landing page. If we take a look, there's a lot of styles already written for this page, as we've styled the text and other base elements, as well as the header and the footer. This is good. This is what we want. There's no point us writing those things over twice. Let's do what we did last time and start from the smaller elements and work our way out. As we can see on this page, it contains a couple of buttons. The style for these buttons is almost identical to these category tags. They just have a little bit more space on the inside. Let's begin by creating a button class and adding it to our HTML, both on this button and the button in the newsletter card. In our CSS, where we have the category styling, we may as well just add that styling to the button class as well by adding a comma and then the class button. If we take a look, we'll see that our buttons now have the same styling as the category tags. However, there's a couple of extra things the button needs. There's a faint border around the buttons which we need to remove. This is the browser adding that. There also needs to be some more space on the inside. And if you look closely, the font is slightly smaller than that of the categories. That's the browser adding that style again, so we just need to make sure that we normalize it. So underneath here, where we've got our category and button styling, let's just right button again and add those styles in. If we set the font size to 100%, that's going to normalize it. We can take the border off and then add some different, more padding around the inside of this button. That looks pretty good. We can look at the different colours of these buttons later. Now let's take a look at the layout. We can see in the main area of this page that the width is also in line with the width of the header and the footer. So we can use that wrapper class that we've made before. If we look in our HTML, we should be able to add it to our main element, which is encapsulating all of that content underneath the header. And that will set the width to be the same as the header and the footer. Underneath our big hero article card here, we have a set of cards on the left and our newsletter box on the right. Let's lay this out with grid. We need two columns, one on the left, which can encapsulate the heading and the cards, and one on the right for our aside, which contains our newsletter. If we look at our HTML, we can see underneath the top article, we've already wrapped all of this content in a div. Let's add a class to that so we have something to put our grid on. I'm going to add a landing section to my CSS. Now I'm going to use that class to display the contents inside it as grid. We need two columns. This is set with our grid template columns. The first one is going to be twice the width of the second. So I've got two parts to one part. I'm also going to add in a grid gap, so there's space in between these columns, and some margin on the bottom of the whole div, just to push it away from the footer a little bit. So here we have our heading and our cards in the left-hand column and our newsletter in the right-hand column. Notice how we didn't need to specify where to put each part, as the grid will automatically place each direct child one after the other in the cells that it's created. Now we can use the same technique for the smaller article cards on the left of this section. Let's add a class to just that section. For this grid, we need 4 rows and 2 columns. So we have 2 columns, both of equal width. So that's 1 portion each. And then we have 4 rows, each going to be the height of the contents that's in them. So in that case, we write auto as the measurement. And if we do that 4 times, we'll get 4 rows. There is an easier way to do this. There's a repeat function. So you write repeat and open your brackets. You write the amount of times you want to repeat something followed by a comma, and then the thing that you want to repeat. In this case, auto. This is the same as writing auto 4 times. Again, we need a grid gap. And we can see that all these direct children have been automatically placed into the cell. So the header has gone first and then each one of the cards. We need to make the header span both of these columns at the top. Let's begin by adding a class to the header of just this section. Now we can use that class to specify where we want that header to be. If we use our grid row, the row starts at 1 and ends at 2. And if we use our grid column, it starts at 1 and ends at 3 because there are 2 columns. That's much better. We've got our header going across the 2 columns and then each of the cards sitting in each of the cells. The button, however, is also in the wrong place. We want it to be in the right cell and aligned so it doesn't stretch across the entire cell. Let's target it so it always ends up in the last cell of the grid, no matter how many cards we have. We can count backwards for this. Let's use the classes that we've already written in the HTML, our card list and our button. And we can specify it to be in column -2, -1. This is the last column, regardless of how many columns there are. We're also going to align it to the bottom of the cell and make sure it's just in the middle rather than being stretched. That's much better. We still need some space above it though, to pull it away from the card above it. We can do this just by adding a margin above it. Now let's look at the cards themselves. There's a couple of bits of styling that we need to tidy up. The first is the link. Let's add a general anchor styling to the whole of the site, which is blue with no underline. And if we have a link anywhere else, say in the article, it will appear obvious. We'll add it right at the top in our typography section. We'll also add a hover with our :hover. That already looks better. Now let's look at the styling of the overall card. Let's add a class to all the cards on the page, including the big one at the top. We can now use that class to add the similar styling all the cards have, like the category at the top. We can use that class to add all the similar styling that the cards have, like the category and the date being set apart at the top above the header. The card itself can sit in the common elements part of our CSS, as you might have another page with the card styling. It's not specific to the landing page. Let's start by getting that category and date set apart. As you can see in our HTML, the markup is the same throughout, and we have a header in each of our articles with a div inside with the category and the time in. We can use that div to style these items. Notice how it's affected our big card at the top too. This is good, as this is how it is in the design. Something that we need to tackle is the size of our images. We don't have a lot of control over them at the moment. They are just the size of the actual image that we're including in our HTML. Because of the way that we are viewing this in the size browser that I have, you can't really see that this is going to cause a problem. But if the browser were to get smaller, these images would still stay the same size. We can make the images fit properly and resize with some special CSS. First of all, we need a container for the image. So let's use our figure element. We'll add it into our HTML around the images for each of the cards. Let's remember to include our top one as well. We can now add some CSS onto the image to make it fit within this figure element. The figure element itself will stay the size of the card rather than the image, which is what we want. We're going to set the object fit on this image to cover. We're also going to set the width and the height to 100%, so it fills our figure element. The object fit property set to cover is telling the image to cover the space rather than being its original width. We'll notice the difference because our image in our top part is now spanning the entire width, which is what the figure in this part of the page is doing. We'll tackle that in a minute. But first, we need to do some more styling on these cards. We need to change the order of the items in our card, so the category and the date sit at the top, as per the design. Let's use Flexbox on the header to lay out the heading and the category and the date, and then we'll be able to change the order. If we look in our HTML, we'll notice in any of the headers for our card that there's a div surrounding the category and the date. We'll specify an order for that div. As we're here, let's also specify a line height so these headings are spaced out better. If we look at our design, we can see that the background colour of these cards is white. There's also a faint blur around each of them. We can use our card class to add that styling. One other thing is that in the design, all the text has got some space around it, inside of this bottom area. Let's add a div around all the content in each card to make this easy for us. We want to add it underneath the figure and include the header, the paragraph, and the link. Now we can use that class and add some padding on the inside. This is looking pretty good. The only thing is this big card at the top. Let's give it a class of its own so we can distinguish it from the other cards. But let's keep that class of card there so it doesn't lose any of the styling that it already has. We'll just add another class. Now all we need is for the image to sit on the left and the info to sit on the right. Let's use our display grid again. So on our class of card big, we can display grid. And with our grid template columns, we want one bigger column and one smaller column. Remember, our items are going to be auto-placed. So the image is now on the left, and that info div that we just added is on the right. We also need some space above and below this bigger card. Great. That bigger card was a lot simpler once we'd tackled the smaller cards. One final thing is to look at the newsletter box on the right. Let's take a look at that in the next video.